From the CISO series, it's Cybersecurity Headlines.
U.S. House passes bill to boost chip manufacturing and R&D. 1 in 7 ransomware extortion attempts leaks key operational tech records, and the donation site for the Ottawa truckers' Freedom Convoy protest exposed donors' data. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Dave Stirling, the CISO at Zions Bank Corporation. Dave, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time.
Glad to be here, Rich. Thank you so much for having me.
We'll get into the conversation in just one moment. Of course, we want to thank our sponsor, Datadog, real-time threat detection and configuration audits. Of course, you can join us live. Come to LinkedIn Live. Just go to CISOseries.com. Look for the Week in Review page. You can find the link there. We have about 20 minutes, though, so let's jump right in. Can't wait here. First story, U.S. House passes bill to boost chip manufacturing and R&D. Last Friday, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the America Competes Act of 2022, which includes $52 billion in funding to help semiconductor companies build new factories and to fund research and development. It also earmarks $45 billion to boost the supply chain and alleviate problems related to chip shortages, which have hit key sectors such as consumer electronics, automotive. I don't think I'm breaking any news there. But, Dave, my question for you is obviously good news overall, not an immediate fix. And we're seeing the EU also pass, or at least introduce similar legislation for kind of a similar kind of funding bill, public and private funds going there. We know the public and the media kind of have notoriously short attention spans, especially for something as obtuse at times as a semiconductor shortage or something like that. There's also the ongoing issue of political polarization. Party lines tend to strangle improvement initiatives, especially we've seen this with infrastructure time and time again. I would say this qualifies as infrastructure as well. What are your thoughts about the bill and any better alternatives out there you've seen proposed in the U.S. or even overseas?
Well, it is really important and it is overdue. We had a much larger share in the U.S. of global manufacturing several years ago, and that's just kind of atrophied. And when we look at what we need to do to get on top of it, it's not something we're going to fix tomorrow. I really, your point about needing to make some investment now and being patient while these major investments come to bear, we can actually bring our capacity up. I think a big point of though, it is aside from the geopolitical and trying to compete with other nations, it's just really a lot of global supply chain security considerations. If we had a drought in Taiwan, that has a lot of that supply coming out of it today, they could have their chip manufacturing curtailed. And so that would have repercussions throughout all the industries you mentioned. So it's just really sound to make sure that we're doing everything we can domestically to shore this up. And I'm really excited to see this legislation move forward.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that kind of, not just from it's better to have the chips produced locally just because it's faster to get the supply, but just a diversification from, like you said, like a drought or any kind of natural disaster mucking up the works there. So really great point. Really appreciate that. Next up here, 1 in 7 ransomware extortion attempts leaks key operational tech records. This finding comes from a study by Mandiant. Back in the day, ransomware was simply used to infect systems and extort blackmail payments. But now operators target high-value targets for larger payoffs. These include things like utilities, hospitals, and key supply chain players, we just alluded to just our last conversation. Now, they're out to steal data in the form of employee credentials, asset tags, third-party vendor agreements, even legal documents and project files. Access to this type of data can enable threat actors to learn about an industrial environment, identify passive least resistance, and engineer cyber physical attacks. Dave, this just shows that the bad guys know how to leave the golden eggs and kind of steal the goose, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
In your experience, do you feel that companies, especially talking about senior management, have caught on to this is the game now? And is 1 in 7 a good batting average?
Well, it's better than all 7 out of 7 that they looked at having the data, but I think it's a really small sample size to say exactly where the enormity of the problem is. And to your point about leadership, leadership has been really focused over the years on making sure that the really big headline grabbing things from big breaches in the prior decade were customer records and data and stuff to commit fraud and identity theft. And I think that collectively as a community, we need to educate our executive teams that there's a lot of those, the goose that you mentioned is the ability to just really drive ever more sophisticated attacks as you understand the environment. It's not limited to OT. It's the way a company's structured, what their norms are, how they go about it, and whether it's leading to espionage or complete sabotage or whatever the case may be. Those are areas to consider with everything that you have in your company being at stake, not just what we used to consider kind of the crown jewels.
Yeah, just even from a social engineering aspect, I imagine,
Yeah,
getting project files, like just knowing who to call up and yell at and pretend to be a person like that has so much like if you can do that effectively, I imagine that would be enormous, a great way to get into an organization for sure.
that's a gold mine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the white truck and a clipboard principle of of cybersecurity, right? You can do anything if you know who to yell at.
Yep.
All right, our next story here, stolen crypto used to fund North Korean missile program. A UN report found that North Korean cyber attacks stole over $50 million worth of digital assets between 2020 and mid-2021, providing an important revenue source for the regime's nuclear and ballistic missile program. These attacks targeted 3 crypto exchanges across North America, Asia, and Europe. There are others suspected. Those are the ones they've confirmed. Other reports suggest the number is closer to $400 million. And the sum total over the years beyond the 2020-2021 time period is estimated to be at over $2 billion. History is filled with stories of countries that get blindsided by increased sophistication from an attacking nation in terms of war technology. Do you feel like North Korea's cyber talent should be taken more seriously at this point?
Yeah, I think it's irresponsible not to consider. I mean, traditionally, the narrative from threat intelligence has been they're acquisitive, they're funding their programs, so they're just stealing cash or stealing cryptocurrency. The central bank attack in Bangladesh several years ago. It's like it's about getting money and laundering it so they can get missiles, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's just a short-sighted view of what their capabilities are. If they had a little bit more longer view and doing some of these things that other countries are doing in terms of espionage and trying to sell that, or other areas, there's a whole playbook they use that I don't think they've been tapping, and we would just be remiss in thinking that it's always going to remain. They're going for the $1 million payload so they can keep their missiles launching. That's their short-term view.
In terms of a story we covered last week, where there was a Wired story about a hacker basically taking credit for bringing down North Korea's
Yeah.
public-facing internet with what he said was the size of a small pen test. Is that just a matter of priorities in terms of cybersecurity versus cyber theft? Like that's they need the funds to fund the missile program, so that's where the bulk of their priorities go, as opposed to protecting a public-facing internet.
Yeah, and I love that he was just like, I was just really annoyed and somebody needed to do something. Kind of makes it sound like, if only we would rise to the occasion. I think that's unlikely to be repeatable, right?
Mhm.
They're gonna look at that, and just like any kind of entity that's been threatened, they're gonna tie that off and divert a little bit more probably into their blue teams going forward. But their focus has always been offensive, and I don't see that changing.
At least run apt-get update or something like that. North Korea, get on it.
Seriously.
All right, next here, Microsoft disables protocol used by malware. Microsoft announced it has temporarily disabled the MS App Installer protocol for the MSIX packaging format, saying it was being abused by Emotet and other malware. Disabling the protocol means apps cannot be directly installed from a web server. That's what the protocol enabled you to do. Microsoft plans to reintroduce the protocol as a group policy that IT admins can opt into in order to control its usage within the organizations. David, it's understandable that variables like macros and other protocols become wild cards in the operation of applications. We've seen Microsoft taking similar action against macros pretty consistently over the last couple of years now. But does this simply shift the liability for future problems into the lap of IT admins or their employers, as opposed to individual users using these? And is this just kind of a classic, hey, this was convenient, ergo less secure?
Yeah. Well, it is, going back to probably the solar wind stuff from 2020, uh, just about this concept of, do we know what we're installing? Do we know where it comes from? Can we say that it's coming from where we think it is? And these principles really is an ounce of prevention, right?
Mhm.
If we could get that into play. And when you talk about a installer that runs directly from a web page, Just, it's to reduce friction. It's really just trying to emulate what Apple does in their walled garden with their App Store, right?
Hmm.
And the problem is when you introduce that kind of friction on an open system like a Windows computer, you're just really setting yourself up for not being able to introduce those behaviors and capabilities that allow people to know what they're doing. We train people to look at the little lock on their web browser to know that they're using encrypted connections. We could train people to be mindful about what they're installing over time. And I would have hoped they would have just said, we're really introducing just a little bit of caution here, rather than saying, hey, we're going to turn it off and let the admin kind of decide, and maybe look about how we re-enable it. It's a troubling trend of just reducing that friction. That helps, it prevents us from being more mindful about what we install.
All right, before we move on to our next story, I want to spend a few moments with our sponsor, Datadog. Datadog Security Monitoring is part of the Datadog Cloud Security Platform, which protects an organization's production environment and provides threat detection, posture management, workload security, and application security in a single pane of glass. In this Datadog Security Monitoring product brief, you'll learn how to solve cloud complexity challenges with threat detection tools, detect and analyze security threats anywhere in your stack, and deploy turnkey detection rules mapped to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Download the brief today to learn more at datadoghq.com/CISO. All right, one of our more bizarre stories of the week. DOJ arrests New York couple seizing $3.6 billion in Bitcoin. This is the Justice Department seizing a record total of $3.6 billion in cryptocurrency tied to the 2016 hack of Bitfinex. Federal agents arrested Ilya Dutch Lichtenstein and his wife, Heather Morgan, in Manhattan in connection with the crime. Investigators were able to trace the stolen funds to a link to Lichtenstein, Morgan, and their business. From there, the couple converted the Bitcoin to cash using Bitcoin ATMs and by purchasing gold, NFTs, and Walmart gift cards. It seems weird to me to steal millions at the time, now worth billions, and going into Walmart. But I guess that's money laundering is not glamorous, I guess. But this is like straight out of a completely uncredible crime novel. It seems like the particulars of this case, down to the names, Ilya Dutch Lichtenstein. We have Razel Khan, the crocodile of Wall Street. They're also contributors to Forbes, rap stars, clothing designers. Behind it all, though, just this massive dividend from a Bitcoin hack and wave of valuation to make them billionaires. Dave, what's your take on this? And, how do we secure the rights to the movie?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Rich. I was going to say you should get your screenplay out and figure out which A-listers you're going to be casting in those very interesting roles. Truth is stranger than fiction. But what's encouraging here is you see this is one of the latest in a series of stories about how law enforcement has been successful in kind of clawing back what's happened from crypto theft or crypto crime earlier. And it's just encouraging to see the toolkits improving and people leveraging the blockchain to see what's actually happening and be able to reconstruct it. And so we hope this is a deterrent in the future and that there's a quicker turnaround for these types of crimes, because the technology is here to stay. We just need to figure out how to leverage the forensics that are in that to prevent this kind of bad behavior.
Yeah, it does seem like we've reached I don't even want to say a turning point, but a realization that this isn't a fringe. I mean, obviously cryptocurrency is not a fringe thing anymore. It hasn't been for a couple of years, but on the enforcement side of it, that this is just going to be the common course of this kind of money laundering going forward.
Yeah, and they'll be able to respond quickly to it in the future, I would think.
Someday you Mount Gox people, hopefully you'll have your funds recovered someday as well. Next up here, Google sees 50% drop in compromises after 2SV enrollment. In May last year, Google announced plans to auto-enroll users into two-step verification in order to secure accounts from compromised credential attacks. By the way, 2SV, way less good to use than like MFA or anything like that. I just have to say, Google, get your branding straight. This past Tuesday, Google's Director of Account Security and Safety, Jiminy Kim, indicated that Google has successfully auto-enrolled 2SV for over 150 million people and have required another 2 million YouTube creators to enable it. Kim noted that they've seen a 50% decrease in account compromises with enrollees compared to those who are only using passwords. This is a good news story. It helps prove that MFA practices, the preferred nomenclature, do work. Do you think this will be enough to convince, the naysayers I want to say like the people that are, this is too much of a pain in the butt to do, right? Google auto enrolling people, if it was so onerous, we would have heard a massive, a public outcry about this, right?
Yeah, it is in the no-brainer good news
Yeah.
department, and but I just want to see it trumpeted from the housetops every time we hear an MFA feel-good story. Salesforce also just recently mandatory MFA for their enterprise customers, and it's just great to see this gospel spreading. And I think that what companies and both the software providers and corporations can do, organizations can do, is just do whatever we can to reduce the friction on that enrollment. I mean, I spent a recent weekend with extended family enrolling people in push authentication on their smartphone. We come a long way from those old RSA LCD
Oh yeah.
tokens with the
Oh
numbers
yeah.
that change, right? And so, the technology is getting better every time. There's, giant yes, no buttons that pop up on your screen. So the technology is getting better. We just have to keep pushing this, and just tremendous news from Google that they've had such a meaningful improvement.
And David, how nice of you to enroll family in that. That's like a PS. That's like your Thanksgiving or Easter or whatever holiday you're going to be celebrating up next. Your St. Patrick's Day PSA. Do it for your family.
Yeah, exactly.
Help them out.
Exactly.
Help them out. All right, our next story here. Federal use of cell siphoning tech on the rise. According to documents seen by The Intercept, 14 of the 15 U.S. cabinet departments acquired products from the Israeli surveillance company Celebrite in recent years, as well as several other federal agencies. This includes the Department of Agriculture and Education, HUD, and the CDC. I pulled those out because it didn't seem like those would be typical Celebrite customers potentially. In SEC filing, Celebrite claims to have over 2,800 government customers in North America. I guess maybe I'm hoping Canada just has a ton of them. The company's flagship product is the Universal Forensic Extraction Device, a phone, desktop, and cloud hacking kit. Most federal agencies did not comment how they use Celebrite products, with the Department of Education and Department of Energy saying it was used to determine if a government-issued device was compromised. This whole story has a, kind of wallet inspector vibe to it, especially
Mhm.
given what we've already seen going on with NSO. David, what's your take on this?
Yeah, well, Celebrate's been around for a while, and every time one of these stories breaks, there's a lot of passion about it. And I think most of the cybersecurity community, myself among them, were really passionate about privacy. And it seems like every time we're just in this constant battle to do what we can to be reasonable citizens and not worry that we're going to be surveilled without cause there. And so, what I hope is that the public policy debate and the visibility with our legislatures and our federal lawmakers is going to be there to help introduce some guardrails here,
Mhm.
because it's great if you're a DOE person and you're worried that security person and you're worried that a device may have been compromised, but is that really the way that it's being used? And if you got 14 out of however many agencies that have been, on the customer list, you just have to assume there's some spillover into some things that I think most, people on the street would probably say, hey, that's probably not the way it was intended. So having some visibility and some continued public policy debate about this is really important.
All right, and our final story of the day, donation site for Ottawa truckers' protest exposed donor data. The donation site used by the protesting truck drivers in Canada's capital city has fixed a security lapse that exposed passports and driver's licenses of donors. The Boston, Massachusetts-based donation service Give Send Go became the movement's primary donation service last week after GoFundMe froze millions of dollars in donations, citing police reports of violence and harassment in the city that violated its terms of use. TechCrunch was tipped off that of the data lapse after the person working in the security space found and exposed, you guessed it, Amazon-hosted S3 bucket containing over 50 gigabytes of files, and this included those passports and driver's license collected during the donation process. So, David, focusing on Amazon S3 side of the story, it seems this is the familiar story in cloud security here. What are your thoughts as to why this data gets left open like this? It's just like a perfect cybercrime niche. These are actively scanned for at this point and have been for years. Given that people who donate to these funding sites are generally, in a passionate state of mind and even more unaware potentially of cybersecurity precautions than usual.
Yeah, cloud security is hard to do, Rich, and even if you have a big, global bank, for instance, that had trouble with this a few years ago,
Hmm.
what about an organization platform that's very time compressed? There's a lot of passion and emotion going on, both with the people who are setting it up and the people who are donating. It just doesn't create an environment where that's going to be top of mind often. And so you could just see this kind of snowballing and more of it in the future. perhaps a business opportunity for somebody to understand that you can do this in a way that's prepackaged. You get some expertise on it to help people. Maybe the single person in your organizing committee is who has a vague IT background isn't the only resource you should be using. So there's a lot of ways that this could be tightened, but just be cautious when you're putting your information in anywhere is probably the moral of the story.
All right, before we get out of here, any story you reacted passionately to, a thumbs up, an eye roller, just something you reacted to?
Well, you have to roll your eye at the Bitcoin people with their lifestyle and their rapping and all of these things. It just seemed like they were larger than life and didn't quite land it right. So.
At least they got to enjoy those Walmart gift cards. So, Dave, where can people find you if they are so inclined to follow your work and check out more about you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. It's the easiest way to find me, and I try to stay active there. And I really want to help contribute to the community in all the ways that I possibly can. And we're also hiring at zionsbankcorporation.com. You can get into our cybersecurity postings there. We'd love to speak with you. Whatever your skill level, we've got openings from entry level all the way up to the more senior postings, and always excited to talk with our LinkedIn community about that as well.
Well, Dave Stirling, the CISO at Zions Bank Corporation, thank you so much for being on the show. Truly appreciate your time. Great conversation as always.
Thank you, Rich. Great time today.
All right. And thank you, of course, to our sponsor, Datadog, real-time threat detection and configuration audits. Reminder, there will be no Friday video chat next week, but mark your calendars, tell your voice assistant of choice, and create an NFT that points to our next video chat on Friday, February 25th, about hacking sprawl, an hour of critical thinking about how to manage everyone's ability to harness and deploy computing power. We'll be back next week with another edition of the Week in Review, though, on Friday, 12:30 p.m. Pacific, 3:30 Eastern. And you can still get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines every single day. 6 minutes will get you all caught up. Until then, until next week, I'm Rich Straffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.